Thank you for joining me again. Today's chapter, chapter 25, is called Where Shall Wisdom Be Found? After the time of Ezra, and for the last few centuries of the Old Testament period, Israel, as we have seen, became the people of the book. The law of Moses was paramount, and what went on in public and private life was governed by it, just as much as what took place in the temple and in the synagogues. Only the Psalms show that personal faith was still very much alive, and that many found in the festivals and ceremonial of the temple a real sense of joyful communion with God. There was, however, in this period, another antidote to the rigid legalism imposed on all aspects of life by the priestly rulers of Israel. This was the contribution of a group of writers known as the wisdom scribes. 3 books in the Old Testament came from their pens: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. These sages were primarily concerned with the nature of the good life. They were content to leave institutional religion in the hands of the priests, and deeper questions about the spiritual life in the hands of the psalmists. They were more concerned with the humdrum routine of day-to-day existence. Their chief interest was the human situation. The things they wrote about were people's virtues and vices, and the pursuit of happiness. They made it their business to translate the great insights of the prophets into everyday terms, to show how what Amos and his successors had said about God, the world, and ourselves could be worked out in practice in the ups and downs of human affairs. They've sometimes been called the humanists of Israel, and in a general sense, this is quite a good description of them, so long as we recognise that their humanism was firmly anchored in God. The book of Proverbs is the least interesting of the 3 wisdom books in the Old Testament. By the same biblical convention which attributes all the laws to Moses and all the Psalms to David, all the Proverbs are ascribed to Solomon. It may indeed have been in his day that the type of moral axioms that we find in the book of Proverbs began to be collected. They're obviously the work of expert teachers of morality, and not like our own "a stitch in time serves 9, the casual products of folklore. But like the laws and the Psalms, most of the Proverbs came from a much later date than that of the man to whose name they've been loosely attached. Most of the wisdom writings, including the book of Proverbs, come from after the exile. The answer to the question, which makes the title of this chapter, Where Shall Wisdom Be Found?, is given by the writer of the book of Job. But all the wisdom scribes would have agreed with him when he says, "The fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding." In the eyes of the authors of Proverbs, the wise man is the man who organises life in accordance with the will of God, as it has been shown to us. He does not need to be a clever man to be wise in this sense. Nor is a fool, according to these sages, an ignoramus. He is a man who cheats and lies, who is at the mercy of his own hot temper, who drinks too much, who is sexually promiscuous. Such a man is a fool, they say, because he brings disaster upon his own head. In other words, it pays to be good. Some people are inclined to sneer at this and tell us that this is not the best reason for trying to live a good life. We should love goodness for its own sake, they say, or we should seek after goodness because God himself is good. The writers of the Proverbs would probably have agreed with them, but they would have gone on to say that in this workaday world, the ordinary man needs to hitch his wagon to something a bit closer to earth than a star. They would perhaps have added that if we feel that the Creator has made the kind of world that runs properly only when moral principles are observed, goodness is bound to pay in the sense that we are managing our lives in harmony with the Creator's will and not in opposition to it. So the writers of Proverbs give us page after page of sanctified common sense, urging the case for cultivating the virtues of honesty, sobriety, kindness, diligence, and chastity. As an alternative to self-interest and a couldn't-care-less attitude, it is undoubtedly good advice and in line with what philosophers and teachers of the good life in all religions have always said. Where we may question the writers of Proverbs is in their claim that the good man will always prosper in this world, for that is obviously not true. No one saw this more clearly than the author of the fascinating little book called Ecclesiastes, which is also part of the wisdom literature of the Bible. Ecclesiastes consists of the reflections of an elderly man who had sought happiness in one way after another. But whether it was by acquiring knowledge, or amassing wealth, or by ringing the changes on the ancient recipes of wine, women, and song, he found that it all ended in disillusionment. His verdict is, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. He doesn't share the easy optimism of the writers of Proverbs, who argued that honesty is always rewarded and that crime does not pay. He's too much of a realist for that. He has seen wickedness crowned with honour and prosperity, and simple, honest men crushed against the wall. Crooks grow fat on their ill-gotten gains, and good men are hated and envied for acts of kindness. He does not doubt that providence holds the reins, but he is mystified by the fact that luck seems to play so large a part in life. I have seen servants upon horses, he says, and princes walking as servants upon the earth. So, he goes on, in this grey and so often meaningless world, the best we can do is to make the most of life when we can. There is a time for tears and a time for laughter, a time for mourning and a time for dancing, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war and a time for peace. We cannot hope to understand the mystery of life. The one thing of which we can be certain is death. Despite this melancholy assessment, Ecclesiastes still ends his book on a note of courage. While life remains, he says, eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a glad heart. Spend your days with the woman you love. Whatever work you have to do, do it while you can. For there is neither achievement, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave where you are going. No one would pretend that Ecclesiastes gives us a wholly satisfactory philosophy of life. It's been called a gospel of moderation in all things for tired men in chaotic times. There is no suggestion that we should attempt to do anything about the mess the world is in except to grin and bear it. Perhaps if Ecclesiastes had been less concerned with helping others, he would not have felt so strongly that all is vanity. But it is a brave and honest book, and one which reflects the mood of all of us when we are depressed by the number of things in life that we simply cannot understand and for which we see no explanation. Perhaps this is why the book of Ecclesiastes is included in the Bible. There are times when there seems to be no other solution than to echo Ecclesiastes' closing words. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It may well be, as Dean Bradley said, that the Bible in its capacity as a looking glass of life has kept here a place for the sigh of defeated hopes, and for the gloom of the soul vanquished by the sense of the anomalies and mysteries of human life. The third of the wisdom books of the Old Testament, the book of Job, is the greatest of the three, and in the authorised version of our English translation is one of the masterpieces of world literature. It faces up to the problem which has always vexed man's minds. Why does an innocent man suffer? It tells the story of a worthy character, Job, whose conduct was above reproach, who was renowned far and wide for his integrity and his benevolence. If the writers of the book of Proverbs were right, He should have been blessed, blessed with this world's goods, and should have enjoyed to the full the rewards of his virtues. So indeed it was to begin with. Then one disaster upon another befell him. Calamity upon calamity robbed him of his property and possessions. His family perished in a hurricane, and he himself was afflicted with a loathsome type of leprosy. According to the orthodox teaching of his time, such adversity was the result of sin, since prosperity was the reward for virtue. Job's three friends, the notorious Job's comforters, try hard to persuade him that if he will only turn to God in penitence, he will find that God is ready to forgive. But Job angrily declares and denies that he has anything to repent of, certainly nothing that would account for his present plight. His friends are convinced that Job must be guilty and pass from insinuation to accusation, wildly inventing charges which they know to be untrue. So determined are they to defend religious orthodoxy. Job's problem is an agonizing one. The one thing he's sure about is his own innocence, and this he will not compromise. He accuses God of playing cat and mouse with helpless mortals like himself, calls God the great spy who will not leave men in peace, using his power to strike them down, allowing rogues to flourish, and victimizing the weak and helpless. In his heart, Job does not doubt that there is an overruling providence, but he sees no reason or justice in what has happened to himself. At times, he even wonders whether there is a God of justice at all, and whether the world is not in the hands of some blind fury. The climax of the drama comes when Job and his friends have exhausted each other with their arguments. Job still maintains that he has done nothing to deserve the disasters that have overtaken him. His comforters are equally convinced that he must have done some great wrong. Their inability to reach a solution is a confession of the bankruptcy of human wisdom, and its complete failure to find an answer to this great problem of why a good man should suffer. The author of the book insists that the orthodox view that was current in his day was wrong. Suffering is not necessarily the result of sin, though it may be a test of man's character. In Job's case, he stood up manfully to the test and refused to betray his conscience. Before the drama ends, he reaches peace of mind in the recognition that prosperity or adversity has nothing to do with a man's relationship to God, and that none of us can hope to understand more than a fraction of the mystery that surrounds us. Certainly, as Job saw at last, we are not entitled to question the way God runs the universe on the basis of what happens in our own experience. In the end of the story, Job is restored to health and prosperity. But by now this is incidental. Job might have died in misery as countless good men have done throughout the ages. But he had come to terms with life and learnt that to some questions there are no answers, except to trust in a God who we believe knows the answers. Like the rest of the people of his time, Job believed that death was the end of everything. In the midst of his agony, he wistfully hoped that perhaps this might not be so, but he did not know. It was not until New Testament times, after the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, that the whole problem of innocent suffering was seen in a new light.